Up next, we explain why the controversy over singing the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, at the Super Bowl illustrates our tendency to see the worst in each other. All right, Tunde, we're recording this a couple days after the Super Bowl, and we saw a big controversy erupt before the Super Bowl and leading into the Super Bowl about the singing of the Black, quote unquote, Black National Anthem, in addition to the singing of the national anthem. And in this, it was brought out, oh, well, why, for example, well, why is there a separate one there and so forth? And then people took offense and say, oh, this is just racist. Why are you upset about this and so forth? And so you got, as which happens oftentimes, Americans yelling at each other about something and kind of yelling over each other or not communicating with each other, but kind of talking past each other. So what did you make of this controversy? And, just kind of how it came up out of nowhere. This isn't like the first time this ever happened, but it just seemed to bubble up and people were mad for a little bit. And then, as is kind of the normal thing, then people kind of just move on and get mad about something else. But for a couple of hours there, like people were hot.
Good old American culture. Then we move on about something else and don't solve the initial issue that we were trying to deal with in the first place.
We just want to feel something, man.
I know. Listen, man, it didn't escape me that we still have large swaths of this country that can't agree on what the cause of a civil war was that ended literally 160 years ago this year.
I think that's better that refuse to agree.
They might say that we refuse, right? That's my point.
Agree.
Like, I think that this goes back
they refuse to agree with what the Civil War, the leaders of the South of the Civil War said.
No, I know. That's my point. Information
but
and truth.
Let's get to today's topic, though, before we...
This is one of those where information and truth aren't the same thing, obviously. But here's the thing. I think this particular discussion around the Super Bowl and this song specifically and the calling it of a national anthem, I think we need to... This is where, again, it gets very nuanced in our culture in America with this racial stuff, right? And history, because everybody's emotional about it. And it's, it's important stuff for us Americans. There is a history around the Lift Every Voice and Sing, the name of the song, which is called the Black National Anthem, which we can discuss. But there's also the reality that the Super Bowl represents a cultural moment annually. It's almost like at this point, it's a ritual in the American culture annually, where we all come together as Americans and share that experience. So it's like I see it from the different perspectives. Obviously, as a Black American, I appreciate what the song "Lift Every Voice and Sing" means, and the history and the context of it. Why there is even a discussion about a Black national anthem. All that stuff I understand, and I appreciate it, and I respect it, and it deserves to be part of our story as Americans, not just Black people. But I also can appreciate why a lot of people outside the Black community kind of don't understand and feel uncomfortable that there is what they might see as a competing anthem with the traditional national anthem of the United States, because most countries only have one national anthem. So again, it goes back to this uniqueness of American culture in the modern world where separate but equal, right? We have these two competing narratives of the American story. And sometimes like this, they play out in public. And again, because we're not conditioned to discuss these things in public as a culture with each other, like you said, we talk past each other. So
I wouldn't say that they're competing narratives as much as they're concurrent narratives. And what it's a result of different perspectives of what has happened over the course of American history. And I think it's part of the potential strength of America, but also part of the difficulty Americans have with being unified generally. It's the difficulty in synthesizing our past in the present. And what do we do? Like, there are different perspectives of the Jim Crow South, depending on who you are and like your ancestors and so forth. There are different perspectives on Manifest Destiny. There's different perspectives on all these things. Yeah. And so how do you synthesize that in your own mind in present day? How can we all feel good about that, or feel good about America's past, to feel good enough about America's past that we can move forward? And are we looking at different things to feel good about and so forth? So I think that's part of the difficulty. One of the things that this reminded me, though, is we did the book The Righteous Mind a few years back, and we did a show on it, read the book, and so forth. And one of the things that was talked about in that is that some people inherently are made more uncomfortable, and this is not something that they're wanting, but this is just who they are. They're made they receive discomfort. They are just made uncomfortable when things are done to emphasize differences, and some people aren't made uncomfortable about that. And so something like this, which I think it's great that there's a Black National Anthem. I think that the fact that from the perspective of a group of people that was excluded from American society for so long, it's difficult to then say, okay, now all of the last 200 something years of American history where you were excluded from everything, let's just put all that to bed. And now we're not going to exclude you anymore. Just get all our stuff and forget everything that you had done before that to build community, to build kind of your patriotism. And so that's not a reasonable ask. So I can see why there is an attachment to lift every voice and sing. But then I also know psychologically that some people are just going to be made uncomfortable about that. There may be some racist people in that, but that's not a sign of racism. That's a sign of, hey, I thought we were trying to all be together. And that's not a intellectual argument. That's something that's coming from them. If you go back to The Righteous Mind, that's something coming from the elephant, not the writer, so to speak, saying that, okay, I'm made uncomfortable by this in my gut. And then I'm trying to explain it away after the fact. But ultimately, I'm made uncomfortable. So you have this emotional reaction that some people are going to have. But then from another perspective, it makes all the sense in the world. It's like, well, why are you objecting to a place that I'm able to find pride in my country? That illustrates the divide and that difficulty.
Yeah, I think that's where you're very spot on with this idea that some minds, just the way that some people's brains, the way they develop and all that, by pointing something out, they tend to see it as something other. But by not pointing it out directly, but pointing to it as an inclusion, as part of the bigger fabric of something else, they may see that differently. So what I'm saying here is, to your point, there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily racist, but when they hear that a Black National Anthem is going to be sung, the fact that that's what I mean. It's like you said, that the elephant and the rider, for those that haven't read the book, The Righteous Mind, it just speaks to kind of the conscious versus the subconscious. But
with the subconscious being the elephant, that our conscious minds oftentimes are just simply coming up with explanations for things that our subconscious want to do anyway.
And so that's the thing, is that but from a subconscious level, the fact that you're pointing out that is a Black National Anthem to that person, even though they're not racist by the traditional definition of it, what it does is it reminds them that, hey, this group of people is different. And that can create an emotional reaction. Like, well, why do they always got to do something different? Versus if this, think about it. The national anthem, actually, the American national anthem, was sang by a Black gentleman. I can't remember his name, but no one complained about that, right? So because the same mind will look at that guy singing the American national anthem and say, yeah, he's one of us. He's an American. And so that's why this is kind of, I think, the crux of one of the main issues of our American culture that we've all been living with post-Civil War, really post the founding of the country, which is there's a group of people, like you said, that have a perspective and an experience that has not yet been acknowledged really by the mainstream of American culture. Because every time, and we just saw this in the last 3 weeks, when they try to get rid of the contributions of Black pilots during World War II in training videos in the Air Force. That's why a lot of Black Americans feel that they've had to have historically do things for themselves, like have historically Black colleges and universities, because they were excluded and prevented legally by going to white, or just, I would say white institutions, but they were just the only universities that existed at the time. So Blacks had to create their own. So like you just said, there's a large history pre the 1960s of Blacks being excluded of the United States experience legally. And so what do you do with that as a nation? Do you not listen to those people, and do you keep putting them down whenever they have something to add or something to say? Or do you say, we acknowledge this happened. And that's what I said about the Civil War is that, if we can't agree on something that happened 160 years ago, I don't think we're going to, we're not getting anywhere with these arguments about anthems.
Well, but I think that there's a way to move forward without that. I mean, I think the difficulty, though, is that this person who, again, I'm setting aside that there are people who are racist that are just like, oh, hey, I don't want to see anything that has anything to do with
I agree.
and like, so, but setting aside that person's not constructive, like that person is ideally that we can isolate that person from the person who's not necessarily racist, but is made uncomfortable by emphasizing differences psychologically like that. That's just in their psychology. Like that's the goal ultimately is to separate those two so that the racist can't influence the person who just has this uncomfortableness that they don't even know where it's coming from, but they can be talked down from that ledge. Which is what happened at various times. If you look at the civil rights movement, so to speak, like that's the kind of thing that happened there with the approach of certain leaders at that time. So you have the situation in this case where you quote unquote emphasizing these differences and how you're going to have people with that reaction to that. But as I noted before, it's not the fact that there were so many accommodations that Black folks just had to create for themselves over the whole course of most of American history. Like the idea of them not being excluded, whether it be legally or just functionally from pretty much all aspects of American life, has existed for the bulk of American history. And we can't just wipe that away. And that's kind of the thing that I feel like that's the part we have to be able to harmonize, like that we can't wipe it away. So what do we do with it? Does that entail singing a Black National Anthem? Or I know you have a great story talking about the National Bar Association versus the American Bar Association. What do we do with that? Well, let me go ahead and give that story because I think that's very illustrative.
Well, no, I mean, just something I shared with you. Yeah, something I shared with you a little while ago that it was years ago. I was when I was in corporate America, a company was sponsoring an event at the National Bar Association's annual
Let me jump in real quick. I'm sorry. The American Bar Association, I'm an attorney. The American Bar Association is like the Bar Association national for lawyers and so forth, just generally speaking. The National Bar Association is a similar type of organization, but it's for Black lawyers. So you could be a member of both if you're Black, but it was created for Black lawyers, 100 some years ago. But go ahead.
Yeah. And also let's be clear. The Black organizations don't exclude non-Blacks. I used to be on the board of the National Association of Black Accountants, and we had white members, Hispanic members, all that. So, just to be clear,
it's kind of like with the schools, it's kind of historically Black,
correct,
more than Black type of thing. Yeah.
So, but the thing is, so I had someone that was she was Swedish and, lived in the United States and didn't understand, the history of America and our culture. And, we happened to have a conversation and she was I was explaining to her where I'd been at the National Bar. She was asking, she goes, well, how come? I appreciated the perspective, right? She's not American coming in here and just seeing things the way they are now. And she's saying, well, how come the Black people have all this stuff just for Black people, right? And that was her question. And I was like, well, and I explained the history, just like we've been doing, right? That there was for a long period of time, Blacks were excluded. I think the National Bar Association started, I think, in 1912 or something like that. And like you said, so
the American Bar Association didn't let Black lawyers in.
Yeah, exactly. So what were Black lawyers going to do if they wanted to congregate and get better at and share, the ideas and information? They had to create their own association. Yeah. And so once integration happened, 60 years ago, like you said, there's a cultural lineage, there's history there. You don't just shut down things, right? Yeah. And I think this is where it's just a dilemma because the majority group doesn't have an interest in hearing the stories like this from the minority group. And that's kind of it. Like we're still here in America.
Well, you have to say some in the majority group don't. Or
well, I'm just saying there's enough of them.
Because
I would say
where we are now if that was the case.
Well, I'm just saying this, right? There's enough of a critical mass of people. No, but seriously, James, think about it. This is why in our country we have, like we said in the show last week, we're on this third wave of this. First was Reconstruction after slavery. Blacks got some benefits that got kicked back because too many people were nervous about seeing,
Black progress, Black backlash that followed. Yeah.
Then you've got the 60s and you got kind of the morphing of the Dixiecrats into the Republican, base with the Southern strategy by Nixon. And, there was the kind of fits and starts in the 70s and 80s. Then things got smoothed up. People want to forget everything. Let's not talk about it. And now here we are again, where there's hostility to ideas like DEI and inclusion, which hasn't really changed. Like the scenery hasn't changed much in the last 20 years in American life, like meaning the amount of blacks and non-whites in corporate America, all that stuff. So what I'm saying is that this becomes a recurring theme in our American culture because we refuse to deal with the original, I guess, the original sin of who is an American, right? Like, is America an idea where anybody can come here? You could look like an Asian, look like an African, look like a European, doesn't matter. But if you conform and you accept this system of American, the Constitution, and our form of government and our culture, then you're just American. Or is American a white person?
Kind of the vision articulated by none other than Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, well, exactly. And my point is that, but that's what I'm saying. But now it's like, or is a white American, a white person with blonde eyes and blue hair, blue eyes and blonde hair, sorry. And the rest of us are just visiting and renting. And it's that whole thing of the founding documents, we the people, all men are created equal. And that question of, James, did the founding fathers consider you or I part of that story to be men, or are we subhuman? And because we won't discuss these things as a country, as a nation, and just put it to bed, we keep having these fits and starts where the people like you and I are saying, hey, we're human beings too. We obviously are here. We helped build this country. We got a story. And you got, like you said, not everybody, but enough in the majority group to say, we don't want to hear it, and we just want to keep moving with the story
I don't think you should say that we don't discuss it, and we have discussed it. That was the civil rights movement. There are constitutional amendments dealing with all this stuff, and so those decisions have been made. But I think more what you're talking about is that there's some in the majority group that won't accept it. And
like culturally, that's really what I'm saying.
Like they just want more of a Confederate States of America setup than a United States of America setup. If you go based on kind of what the Confederate leaders said,
what the cornerstone speech was.
So I think but that's not going to necessarily go away. There's always going to be that selection of people. The question is really if you consider, in any group, for example, like this is a sports thing also, like you're going to have 60% of the people in the middle, 20% of people pulling one way, 20% of the people pulling another way. And the real question is where that 60% that can kind of go either way goes, And so I think in this instance, this is an issue that has touched certain people emotionally. It didn't change their world, change their world. And so in that majority group that touched them a certain way, the thing that I would push back against is that I felt that there were people trying to insult, but those aren't the people we should be paying attention to. The people that we should be paying attention to are the people who weren't trying to insult, but we recognize there is this level of discomfort. And so maybe it goes to, instead of you, when the lady asked you, well, why is there a National Bar Association? Instead of you cussing the lady out and calling her a racist, being like, okay, well, here's why, and then the person at least walks away with saying, okay, well, I get it. You shouldn't have to walk away from 100 years of tradition or, whatever, because now they say, okay, now you guys can come over here and hang out with us too, so but that's how do you synthesize that is ultimately, and I don't mean synthesize it from a legal standpoint. I mean, synthesize it from a cultural and an emotional standpoint. How can we all look at the American experiment that we're doing and feel good about it? Even if we're difficult,
James.
How can we do that? But final thoughts, man.
But that's difficult. Final thought will be that's difficult based on, as you're talking, I'm thinking about part one we just did with the fire hose of falsehoods. You see, that person who is not racist and otherwise would be open to saying, look, I'm not comfortable with two national anthems and I'm not going to be, but I respect the fact that this song exists and I
understand why it's here now.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
So now my writer can at least try to calm my elephant.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But what happens is with the proliferation of all this social media stuff, what happens is they get moved into a silo that just tells them why this is only bad and why these black people are crazy and why they're un-American and all this. And one of the things I went and I looked to say, okay, what were all the songs performed outside of the halftime show? Because I know obviously the performer there did a bunch of songs in the halftime show, but just in general, there were three main songs performed at the beginning of the national anthem. Beginning of the Super Bowl: National Anthem, America the Beautiful, and Lift Every Voice and Sing. My point is that because it was Lift Every Voice and Sing is also referred to as the Black National Anthem, again, it brings up race. So a lot of people in this country will immediately just focus on that.
Yeah.
And instead of, because no one, that's what I'm saying. I didn't realize America the Beautiful was sung. And it's just because no one's claiming that. And then no one's saying that's the Chinese anthem or this or that. It's just a nice American song, right? Just like Lift Every Voice and Sing is a Christian hymnal and a nice, song. And so I think that's why I'm saying that this still is showing us that this idea of race is the big third rail in American culture. But then if we amplify the fire hose of falsehoods, the ability to keep people who are nervous about these things and intimidated by them siloed into a position on their phones and with their social media of always being told this is bad and this is ruining the country. I think that's how we kind of get here, that these things that otherwise shouldn't be a big deal in a conversation, like this shouldn't take 2 or 3 days of a national dialogue in the media and all that, the idea of a Black National Anthem being sung next to the national anthem, but it does. And so I think we should just prepare for more of this.
I wouldn't say that it shouldn't be an issue. I would say that it doesn't have to be. And what you then look at, a person like you or me looking at is, well, whose interests are served by making this a big deal? Because then you can see, okay, well, that's
divide and conquer.
That's why the fire hose of falsehood might be employed to take that what may just be a small discomfort. Like, whoa, what's that? Why that's different. Why are we? Yeah. And turn that small discomfort into hostility or into something that then can be molded, manipulated, and so forth. And so that's ultimately, you said that's the ultimate third rail. That's kind of there is no end to how fruitful for people who do want to get power from dividing.
Race in America is
turning people against each other. There's no end to how fruitful it can be to use the race issue. And that's what society has taught us that. American history has taught us that. But along those same lines, like it also has told us that we can overcome that. It's just, it's something that is not necessarily, it requires greater effort, greater discipline, greater empathy in reaching out than it does to use those issues to kind of knock people apart. So, I mean, that's kind of the struggle, like you really got to want it. That's kind of the struggle we deal with though as Americans. And, it's an ongoing thing. This is another one of those things where there is no finish line.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but I think we can wrap this show.
Yeah. And I'll say this to finish up. I think this is unfair for us, people like us in our position. But I think you made a great point in here in saying that not everybody that's uncomfortable with the idea of, let's say, the Black National Anthem is a racist. And I think it's like, it might not be fair to feel like we gotta kind of go an extra mile and acknowledge that. But I think it's something that we should recognize, that when it comes to something like a national ritual like the Super Bowl and the idea of a national anthem, most people want only one anthem for a country. And that's not necessarily a racist thing on its face. You see what I'm saying? There's a lot of mixed nuance in with a lot of this stuff.
Well, that's why I led, though, with the piece from The Righteous Mind, talking about how, because that was very insightful for me. It's just that there are people who, like, 'cause I'm not one of these people. So I wouldn't know.
That's what I'm saying. We can't project.
Academically, it was explained to me that they like emphasizing a difference affects them, not in their brain, but in their psychology, like deep in them. Like it affects them deeply, and they can be talked off that ledge, but they would have to be talked off that ledge because it would be very easy for them to take that slight discomfort or significant discomfort and take that somewhere else that's very hostile and non-productive, which, as you pointed out, some people take advantage of. Like some people are like, oh, yeah, I can get this part. If showing a difference will put this person on a certain edge, and then I can take that and manipulate it the way I want it to go, mold that the way I want it to go. So, but yeah, we'll wrap this up. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.